I need to make a withdrawal. $110,000, Jasmine Monroe said, sliding her ID and account card across the counter. The teller blinked, then froze. Her eyes flicked down to the slip, then back up to Jasmine's face. There was a slight pause, too slight to notice, if you weren't watching for it. But Jasmine had seen that pause before. Dozens of times she braced. The teller cleared her throat and forced a smile. "Let me just check something," she said, tapping at her keyboard before standing and walking briskly to the back. Jasmine folded her hands. She didn't flinch, didn't look around. She'd been through enough to know exactly what was coming. A moment later, 2 employees reappeared, the original teller, and a middle-aged white man in a blue pinstripe shirt and a smug expression that never fully reached his eyes. Behind Jasmine, a white woman in a tailored suit leaned over to her companion and said, "Just loud enough. We've seen this before." The man chuckled. "Oh, absolutely. Trying to clean out a dead uncle's account, maybe." The teller walked back to Jasmine, no longer smiling. "We're going to need to verify a few things," she said. "Withdrawals of this size require additional clearance. I'm within the daily limit," Jasmine replied, calm and composed. "This account has been active for years, and I've made larger withdrawals before." The man beside the teller, Calvin Myers, the branch manager, stepped in. "Ma'am," he said. Adopting that carefully condescending tone Jasmine had heard too many times. It's not about the amount. It's about activity patterns. And frankly, your behavior's raising some flags. "My behavior?" Jasmine asked, tilting her head slightly. Calvin didn't answer. Instead, he turned to a nearby associate and muttered something under his breath. She nodded and walked to the phone. "Are you calling the corporate office?" Jasmine asked. "No," Calvin said flatly. "We're contacting local authorities. This kind of situation, we need to be cautious." Jasmine let out a soft breath. Not surprised, just tired. Within 7 minutes, 2 police officers entered the bank. Their presence shifted the air immediately. Customers stepped aside. One of them instinctively reached for her purse. Jasmine remained still. "Ma'am, we need you to step outside," one officer said. "We received a report about suspicious financial activity. We'll need to ask you a few questions." Jasmine didn't move. "I'm a customer. This is my account. All my identification is on file, and you have no legal reason to detain me." The other officer stepped forward. "We're going to need to see your ID again and hold it while we verify some things." Still seated, Jasmine reached into her bag, slowly, deliberately, not for her ID but for her phone. She pressed a number on speed dial. The screen lit up. Then she spoke, her voice calm but ice cold. "I suggest you call your corporate legal counsel immediately," she said, staring directly at Calvin. "And let them know. Jasmine Monroe is at your branch, and she's watching everything." That was the moment the tone in the room changed. Not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't have to. Before the world called her ma'am, before her name was whispered in corporate boardrooms and legal memos, before she signed 7-figure contracts with a quiet nod, Jasmine Monroe was just another girl that people looked through. She grew up just 4 blocks from the branch. She now sat in the same one where she was being treated like a fraud. Back then, it was the fanciest building on her side of town with polished glass doors and bankers in suits who never looked down at the girls mopping the floor. Her mother was one of them, a janitor, $14 an hour, 6 nights a week. Jasmine used to wait on the marble steps outside while her mother worked the overnight shift. Some nights the security guard would let her in to sit on a lobby chair. Most nights he wouldn't. She remembered the smell of the polish, the sound of the floor buffer, the way people in dress shirts avoided eye contact when she stood too close to the windows. That branch had always been beautiful, but it had never been warm. At 17, Jasmine came in one afternoon clutching a folded envelope with her first ever check, a $450 summer paycheck from working at the local youth center. She was proud, nervous, determined to open her first savings account. She remembered everything: the white blouse she ironed herself, the two big shoes, the photo ID with the slight glare across her face. She waited patiently in line, smiled, handed over her papers. The teller glanced at the check, then her ID, then Jasmine herself. "We can't approve this," the woman said, sliding the papers back across the counter. "Why?" Jasmine asked. "Because you don't have any verifiable income, but this is income," Jasmine said, holding up the check. "I work at the rec center. This is my job." The woman shrugged. "That's not stable enough for our starter account. We've had issues in the past." That sentence stayed with Jasmine for decades. "We've had issues in the past, not you. Just people like you." Jasmine walked out of that bank with her shoulders squared and her jaw set. She didn't cry until she got home, and then she only cried once. After that, she studied harder, got a full scholarship to Howard University, majored in finance, minored in urban development, worked the graveyard shift in the campus library just so she could intern unpaid at an investment firm during the day. By the time she graduated, she had already secured a job at one of the most competitive private equity firms in D.C. She learned to read balance sheets like novels to spot risk, like others spot lies. She never made a single emotional trade. Everything was numbers, trends, leverage. After 5 years in corporate banking, she pivoted to investment law because she realized wealth wasn't enough. Ownership was. Control was over time. Jasmine began buying things, quietly, strategically. First small rental buildings, then commercial lots, then underperforming credit unions. By the time she turned 41, she had flipped 8 distressed banks under a network of shell corporations. Not for publicity, not for ego, but because she remembered what it felt like to be 17 and told she didn't belong. She made it a rule. She would never publicly reveal her involvement with any financial institution she acquired, not until the paperwork was signed, the systems converted, and the real reform began. 10 days ago, her team finalized a deal to purchase a struggling East Coast banking chain, one known for aggressive cross-selling tactics and disproportionately high complaint rates from minority customers. She didn't even flinch when she saw which branch topped the list. It was the one where her mother used to clean floors. It was the same one that called the police on her that morning. She didn't walk in as the CEO. She didn't have to. Her legal team worked through Monroe and Mason Capital's third subsidiary, which operated under a different name. The sale was confidential until the end of the fiscal quarter, but internally it was complete. Ownership had changed hands officially at 8:32 a.m. that morning. Jasmine Monroe was now the majority shareholder and executive chair of the board. She had chosen to come in person for one reason: to see the culture unfiltered. No camera crew, no briefcase, no titles, just her as any other customer. Because if the system couldn't treat her with respect before they knew who she was, then it didn't deserve to exist after they did. Now, as she sat under the same fluorescent lights, she used to study from through a window. As uniformed officers stood over her and bank staff whispered her name like a threat, Jasmine didn't feel rage. She felt clarity. The same bank that denied her as a teenager now bore her initials in its controlling documents. They just didn't know it yet. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as the two uniformed officers flanked Jasmine Monroe. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step outside to continue this conversation," one of them said, hands resting on the belt where his holster sat. His tone was firm, procedural. Jasmine remained seated. "Before we proceed, I'm invoking my right to record this interaction," she said calmly, raising her phone and pressing the record button. "That's not necessary," the officer replied slightly, shifting his stance. "We just want to ask a few questions. Then let's make sure those questions are documented," Jasmine replied, her voice composed but resolute. "I've already identified myself and presented valid credentials. I've committed no crime. I'm a customer attempting to access my own funds." The second officer, younger and clearly less certain, glanced at the bank manager, Calvin Myers, who was standing to the side with crossed arms and a tightly wound jaw. "We were told there were suspicious behaviors and inconsistencies in documentation," Calvin interjected, eager to reassert his control. Given the amount and situation, we needed to be cautious. Jasmine didn't respond to him. Instead, she looked directly at the officers. "You're making a public scene based on an assumption. I strongly recommend you pause whatever enforcement action you're planning." As if on cue, her phone vibrated in her hand. She turned the screen toward the officers. It displayed a name, Angela Pitts, legal counsel. Jasmine answered, "Angela." "Yes, they're here. Yes, I'm recording. You're on speaker." Angela's voice came through the speaker. "Cool and authoritative officers. This is Jasmine Monroe's attorney. She is the legal majority owner of this financial institution as of 8:32 a.m. today. Any further action against her will constitute direct interference with a corporate executive during a protected financial transaction. I strongly advise you stand down until a regional executive arrives." The air shifted. The older officer cleared his throat. The younger one stepped back. Calvin's face paled slightly. Moments later, the revolving doors at the front of the bank spun open, and in rushed a tall man in an expensive gray suit tie, loose badge clipped to his belt. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Derek Lane, Deputy VP of Operations for the Northeastern region. I came as soon as legal called." He extended his hand, not as a superior, but as someone who knew exactly what had gone wrong. Jasmine shook his hand. "Never breaking eye contact, I'd like to verify that the ownership transfer has officially posted." "It has. You're the primary stakeholder. Fully registered." "It's in the system. I've seen it myself." Calvin blinked. "Wait, what?" "She's yes," Derek said bluntly. "You just called the police on the woman who owns this building." Jasmine turned back toward the front counter. "I'd like a copy of the security footage for the past hour. Every angle. I'd also like to review the call log for the 911 report, and I want access to this morning's withdrawal transaction records amounts over $50,000, names redacted. I want to compare how other customers were treated." We'll need some time for that," Calvin stammered. "You have 10 minutes. Jasmine walked calmly toward the center of the lobby, her heels tapping a soft beat into the marble. "Everyone," she said to the assembled staff and curious customers, "please stay where you are. This is not a security threat. This is a leadership transition." A buzz moved through the room. Phones came out quietly. People started recording. 10 minutes later, Jasmine stood in a small back room surrounded by screens. The security officer queued up the requested footage. Jasmine watched herself walk in, watched Calvin step back from the desk after seeing her withdrawal slip, watched him whisper to another employee who then picked up the phone. She noted the time 9:42 a.m. She fast-forwarded 3 white customers made withdrawals of $60,000, $85,000, and $100,000. No one asked them for verification. No one called the police. She turned back to Derek. Bring the entire staff to the lobby. Now, moments later, every employee in uniform stood at attention. Calvin was at the far end, arms crossed tightly. Some looked confused. Some looked scared. 1 or 2 looked ashamed. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. This morning I came to this branch as a customer. She began. I was treated with suspicion, disrespect, and ultimately subjected to the trauma of a police response. Not because of my behavior, not because of policy, but because of perception. She paused. Let the silence stretch. Let me be clear. That perception was wrong, and I am not just a customer. As of today, I am your employer. Gasps. Calvin's arms fell to his sides. But before I decide who remains part of this organization, I want you all to see what happened. She gestured to the screen. The footage played for everyone. This is what bias looks like, she said. It's not loud, it's not always angry. Sometimes it's a whisper, a glance, a choice to pick up the phone for one person and not for another. When the video ended, Jasmine faced them again. Now, she said, her voice razor sharp. Let's talk about accountability. She paced slowly. I want each of you to think about the role you played. Did you speak up? Did you question the assumption? Or did you stand by and watch? Because in this organization, under my leadership, silence is not neutral. It is a choice, and it has consequences. A woman in the back, a teller named Dana, quietly said, I didn't agree with it. I didn't know what to do. Jasmine nodded. That moment, the one where you didn't know what to do, is the moment this culture either grows or dies. I'm not here to destroy anyone, but I will not protect complacency. She looked toward Derek. I want a cultural review of this branch and all surrounding locations, internal audits, anonymous staff feedback, and every complaint on file reopened. Derek nodded already. Texting his assistant, Jasmine stepped back to the center of the room. If you want to be part of change, stay. If you think this is just about one bad day or one bad call, I encourage you to resign now, because what's coming isn't cosmetic, it's structural. She turned once more toward Calvin. And you. Calvin looked like he was about to speak, but Jasmine raised one hand. You will have your say in writing to HR. After I finish watching every second of how you treated me, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the sound of a building realizing it had just been turned upside down. The room had never been quieter. Employees stood in stiff lines near the teller counters, managers hovered awkwardly by the glass offices, and a handful of customers remained seated, phones lowered now, but eyes alert. They knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Jasmine Monroe stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by stillness that vibrated with tension. She motioned to Derek Lane, the regional VP, who handed her a small remote. She pointed it toward the wall-mounted screen behind the reception desk. The display lit up. A single video file appeared. Incident Monroe, Withdrawal, 9:42 a.m. But that wasn't the only clip. Another file was loaded next to it. Micah, Denial, Midtown Branch. A murmur rippled through the room. Jasmine clicked play on the second one first. The screen showed grainy footage from 3 months earlier. A young black boy. Her son Micah stood at the customer service desk of another branch holding a piggy bank in both hands. His voice couldn't be heard, but his lips moved as he spoke politely to the clerk. The employee looked unimpressed, then annoyed. She turned her back, whispered to another staffer, and moments later a security guard stepped into frame. The child was escorted out. No crime, no disruption, just dismissed. The video cut off. The room was silent again. I wasn't in the building when that happened. Jasmine said her voice even low, deadly clear, but I watched it that night. I didn't tell him I saw it. I didn't want him to know that, even in his innocence, he was seen as a threat. Then she clicked the first file. Everyone had already seen it, but now it played for all. No phones, no whispers, just the cold, stark reality of what had happened that morning, her standing at the counter. The glance, the whisper, the phone call. The arrival of officers, her voice calm, unflinching, their faces casual in cruelty. When the footage ended, Jasmine looked around. "Who among you thinks this was acceptable?" she asked softly. No one spoke. She let her eyes move from face to face. Some couldn't meet her gaze. Others looked blank, but one person nodded subtly. Barely, but enough. It was Calvin. She walked toward him slowly. "Thank you," she said. Voice clipped. "Now I know where to start." She turned back to the crowd. "My name is Jasmine Monroe. I am the new majority owner of this bank and its holding company. As of this morning, I have full executive authority. That means I can write checks, reassign positions, and terminate employment." She let that sink in. "I did not buy this institution to punish people." She continued. "But I will not continue a culture of unspoken, well-practiced prejudice that punishes people like me, like my son, for merely existing." She gestured to Derek. He held up a clipboard, effective immediately. Jasmine said, "Calvin Myers is relieved of all duties and terminated for conduct, unbecoming breach of customer trust and discrimination." Calvin's face crumbled. "You can't. This is overreaction." I was following the script. "Then the script ends today," Jasmine said coldly. "You may gather your belongings under escort." She turned slightly. "Diane Marsh, Nicole Tran, and James Redding, also terminated. Your comments and complicity are captured clearly on internal audio." Gasps. 3 employees stiffened. One burst into tears. Another tried to protest, but Jasmine silenced him with a single glance. 5 others are being placed on immediate review and suspension, pending investigation. Derek announced, "They will be notified before close of business." Jasmine looked to the far left, where a young woman stood trembling. Sasha, early 20s. Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. Sasha raised her hand slightly, voice shaking. I knew it was wrong. I heard what they said, but I didn't say anything. I was afraid Jasmine studied her. Afraid of what she asked, of losing my job, of being blamed for overstepping silence again. Then Jasmine nodded. "You won't be blamed for fear, but now you're going to be trusted with responsibility." Sasha blinked. "What, you're being appointed interim lead for our new Community Access Task Force. You'll work directly with HR and client equity to ensure this never happens again." Training, reporting. "Reform!" Sasha gasped. Her mouth opened, then closed. "I don't expect perfection," Jasmine said, "but I expect presence, courage, and change." One of the customers clapped, then another. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Jasmine turned back to the staff. "To the rest of you who remain," she said, "this is a chance. You are not being punished. You are being called in to rebuild a place that reflects the values written on our walls: but ignored at our counters. She paused, then added, and to those watching, those filming, those sitting quietly, this is your story too. Because the world doesn't change in the courtroom or the press release. It changes in rooms like this, in moments like now. And just like that, the tide shifted. Not because of policy, not because of rules, but because someone finally stood in the room and refused to sit down. In the days that followed, the events at the downtown branch sparked conversations far beyond marble floors and teller counters. They spilled into boardrooms, trended on social media, and landed on the front pages of national newspapers. But Jasmine Monroe didn't stop at headlines. She had never been in this for the applause. She was in it for the architecture of trust, of systems of justice. Less than 48 hours after the incident, she convened an emergency executive meeting at headquarters, summoning division leaders from every region across the country. The tone of the meeting wasn't corporate. It was surgical. Jasmine stood at the front of a glass-walled conference room, not behind a podium, but among her team's sleeves rolled up. "We're not managing a PR crisis," she said. "We're identifying a structural flaw, and we are going to fix it before it becomes systemic rot." She announced an immediate audit of all 47 branches under the company's umbrella, focusing not just on transactions, but on customer experience across race, age, income level, and accent. A specialized task force was formed, and Jasmine made sure it reported directly to her, not through layers of filtered hierarchy. She then announced the creation of a nationwide anonymous reporting system integrated directly into mobile apps and in-branch kiosks, allowing both customers and employees to submit experiences of discrimination or bias without fear of retaliation. The system was built in partnership with 2 leading civil rights organizations who would serve as external auditors. "This isn't about image control," she told her team. "This is about cultural repair. If we're going to claim to serve the public, we're going to do it on public terms." Then came the financial commitment, a $25 million reform fund to revamp physical spaces training programs and equity initiatives across the company. Every branch would undergo new bias response training. Not just the usual compliance videos, but scenario-based modules built from real customer complaints, including the very footage from Jasmine and Micah's own experiences. New hires would be evaluated not only on financial literacy, but on empathy awareness and community grounding. A week later, Jasmine took the stage at the company's first-ever Equity and Access Summit, an event hastily arranged but meticulously organized. The media turnout was massive. Reporters, activists, financial watchdogs, and regulators filled the room. The backdrop was simple. The company logo, the phrase, "Trust Rebuilt," and nothing else. Standing before them in a tailored navy suit, Jasmine didn't use legalese. She didn't read from a prepared statement. She told a story. She spoke about Micah, her 12-year-old son, who had saved for weeks to deposit his $50 summer earnings the day he walked into a branch, beaming with pride, and walked out in tears because someone assumed he had stolen the money. He was 11, she said, and already someone made him feel like he didn't belong in a bank, like his contribution didn't matter, like his presence was a problem. She paused. "Let the silence breathe. This institution is not just where we store money," she continued. "It's where we signal belonging, where we decide who is trusted and who is tolerated. And for too long, the answer has depended on skin color, on accent, on assumptions." She leaned forward slightly. "That stops here." She laid out the goals of the $25 million initiative: more multilingual staff, more ADA-compliant redesigns. Dedicated quiet rooms for elderly customers and caretakers, expanded after-school savings education programs for underserved communities. We will not teach children of color to lower their expectations, Jasmine said, voice rising with quiet fire. We will not ask them to shrink their ambition just to fit into a space never built with them in mind. The applause that followed wasn't explosive, but it was sustained. It was respect, not spectacle. When the Q&A began, a journalist from a national outlet asked what made her believe real change was possible in an industry known for protecting its own. Jasmine didn't blink. Because I own it, she said, and because I remember what it felt like to be outside looking in. Later that week, dozens of former customers who had left the bank in frustration reached out, many returning, some not to open accounts, but to volunteer as community advisors. A retired teacher, a local pastor, a young mother who'd been denied a loan 3 times. All of them wanted to contribute to a system that was finally listening. Jasmine walked through the halls of the executive floor that Friday afternoon alone. The space looked the same: glass doors, brushed steel fixtures, quiet hums of computers. But everything had changed, and the changes weren't decorative. They were structural, just like she promised. 3 months later, the air inside the downtown branch felt different. Gone were the polished surfaces that once masked a brittle culture. In their place was something simpler but stronger, a feeling of welcome. It wasn't the new furniture or the community wall covered in artwork from local youth, or even the softly lit signage that now read, "Financial empowerment begins with fairness." It was something deeper. The energy had shifted. Jasmine Monroe stepped through the doors, not as a client, not as the CEO, but as a guest of her own design. Beside her walked Micah, 12 years old, now wearing a navy blazer, a quiet confidence in his step that hadn't been there 3 months ago. He held a stack of folders, each one labeled Monroe Financial Literacy Program, Youth Edition. Inside, lesson plans, resource guides, and a sign-up sheet for the free Saturday classes Jasmine had funded in every branch across the state. This visit wasn't ceremonial. It was personal. The lobby was active, but peaceful. A new team greeted customers with genuine attention. The branch manager, a Latina woman named Carmen, whom Jasmine had personally promoted, approached with a wide, sincere smile. "Ms. Monroe, Mr. Micah, welcome back. Your room is ready." But Jasmine didn't move toward the office. She stood still, letting the moment breathe. Across the room, a man in his 60s, white balding, wearing a brown cardigan, rose from the waiting area. He hesitated, then approached slowly, holding his hat in his hand. "Ms. Monroe," he said softly, "you don't know me, but I was here that day. The day they called the police." Jasmine turned. I watched. I said nothing, and I've thought about that every week since Micah looked up at the man. The man swallowed. "I just wanted you to know. I've learned something. And I'm sorry." Jasmine held his gaze for a long, quiet beat. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "That matters." The man nodded, shoulders lighter somehow, and returned to his seat. Micah turned to her as they resumed walking. "Mom, remember when you told me sometimes doing nothing makes you part of the problem?" Jasmine looked down at him. "I remember." He clutched the folders tighter. "That day when they took your ID, I was scared." She stopped and knelt in front of him, "Me too." "But today," he said, eyes shining, "I'm proud." Jasmine smiled. She brushed a hand gently over his shoulder. Sometimes baby justice doesn't come in shouting. It comes in standing still. In not flinching and letting the truth speak louder than the noise, she rose to her full height. They entered the community room, now filled with a dozen middle schoolers. Black, brown, Asian, white gathered in a circle. A new banner hung above the whiteboard, Money Power, and Belonging. Jasmine handed the first set of materials to Micah, who took his place at the head of the circle, not as a student, but as a peer guide. He began. Some stories don't need to end in anger. Sometimes the quietest stand speaks the loudest when someone simply refuses to be small and instead makes room for others to rise with them. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. If it reminded you of something you've lived or witnessed, share it. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe and stay with us for the next one. Because the more we see, the more we understand, and understanding changes everything.